feminist activist at Sydney University, said angrily, well, yes, the American people is ready to elect a black man, but not a white woman, or not a woman. So what are your thoughts about this? And can we still think along these lines with the election of Trump against Clinton?
You mean the possibility of getting a woman elected in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, whether Trump actually was elected because he was running against a woman.
The factual evidence of misogyny, the factual evidence of nasty misogynistic comments and criticism of Hillary Clinton, some of it legitimate. When you talk about why did you go to this talk and you received $650,000 for honorarium, or why did you vote for the war in Iraq? These are factual evidence. You can, but some of it. Now, what proportion is this is a matter of demographic investigations and conversation. Some of it undoubtedly has to do with the fact that there were anti-woman, misogynistic reaction to the idea of having a woman as president. The other part of it is, as I said, is the, again, equally factual, wonderful essay that Zila Eisenstein wrote in Cairo Review just about a week before the election about feminist imperialism, imperial feminism. Is an excellent essay about how questions of feminism has to include class, gender, race, etc., as you well know. So some of it has to do with the fact that not all women just voted for Clinton because she was a woman, because they have a superior politics. And as a result, they would look at Bernie Sanders' politics or Jill Stein's politics and Hillary Clinton's politics and then vote. This is to say that your diagnosis is accurate. Yes, there is an issue of electing a woman for president in the United States, as opposed to many other countries. Heads of states have been in Europe, in the Islamic world, etc. But that it doesn't exhaust the entirety of the tapestry of developments that was happening in the United States, including some very progressive women who would love to see a woman as president.
Mustafa?
Well, it seems that you are blaming liberals in somehow behind this chauvinism, I think I could call it. But I think that even liberals, they are criticizing even Obama government with his social Obamacare and all his politics.
Yeah.
I think the problem has to do with actually the concept of democracy.
Democracy.
The crisis of identity politics, I think, is
Very
a
good.
crisis of democracy.
Very good.
But when Thomas Piketty wrote his book Capital in the 21st century, in which actually he was criticizing capitalism for not reducing poverty and so on, there was an excellent article written in Project Syndicate by the Nobel laureate economist Stiglitz, who is actually call it democracy in the 21st century. Okay, so he changed capital to say democracy.
Yeah.
So I think actually that now in the United States, they are facing actually this global crisis, which is crisis of democracy.
Oh, and what is it? Your question is
this is exactly the question.
First of all, apropos my criticism of liberals, I am critical of the Democratic National Convention by factual evidence of how they systematically favored Clinton at the expense of Bernie Sanders. This is a factual criticism of the Democratic National Convention rather than a political, ideological, or theoretical disagreement with liberalism, of which I confess I am critical of liberalism. The distinction that you make between Thomas Piketty and Joseph Stiglitz is, I agree, but I think they're related, because Thomas Piketty's assessment, data analysis, that over 100 years the rich have gotten systematically richer and the poor have got systematically poorer, and unless and until you have systematic increased taxation, that discrepancy will not disappear, is actually dovetails with Joseph Stiglitz's notion of democracy in crisis. Democracy is in crisis, and democracy has always been in crisis. But the instrumentality of certain liberal institutions that have facilitated the aura of democracy at the expense of the factual demographic changes that are happening. Right now, as you know, in Europe, massive demographic changes are happening. And I mean, demographic changes that are happening in Europe, say in Germany or in France, etc., are non-existent compared to how many millions Jordan has accepted, or Turkey has accepted, or Lebanon has accepted. Not a fraction of it has actually gone to Europe. But nevertheless, the idea that Europe is under attack, etc., is, as you saw yesterday, one truck, they still don't know who has actually driven this, and the Daesh says we did it, and suddenly European, German election is under threat. So democracy being in crisis, democracy has always been in crisis. Since the time that Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America, he knew how fragile is the very institution of democracy. An institution of democracy has always been fragile, continues to be fragile, as you saw in European history of the 20th century, how fragile democracy is, and how easy it is for Franco to rise in Spain, for Hitler in Germany, for Mussolini in Italy. So it is not new, and many are actually now comparing the rise of Trump, and in fact are afraid of the rise of Trump, especially with this new gadgets, the new technology, of doing to United States what Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler did. So again, I always suggest a larger historical frame of reference in order to stop demonizing that if Egyptians haven't had a democracy yet, or Syria is in tatters, or etc., or is still, for example, in India, not all the examples that used to be need to be from the Arab and Islamic world. In India, still a caste system is very much in operation. That this is as much issue of these societies, their history, their culture, their institutions, as it is about this very nature of the democracy. Otherwise, in Islamic Republic of Iran, every 4 years you have a presidential election and a parliamentary election, and massive people go and vote. But is that a democracy? In what sense is it democracy? If you ask Ayatollah Khamenei says, yeah, of course it's a democracy. Look, people go and vote. But in what way is that? I mean, right now in my thinking, as my colleagues know, I'm increasingly away from the notion of a state and thinking about nations and national sovereignty and national experiences, and nation as a constellation of shared experiences rather than anything else. In short, yes, I agree both with Thomas Piketty and with my colleague, Columbia colleagues, Joseph Stiglitz, but I don't think they are contradictory. They actually complement each other. Does that make sense?
I just wanted to get back on this issue of Bernie Sanders. I have two things to say about this. I think, yes, we have to recognize that the revolts we have seen against liberalism have two sides. One on the left, in Bernie Sanders,
Yes.
and also Trudeau in Canada, and also
Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn in England.
Yeah.
So it is not unanimous. They are on both sides. But the question is this. The wisdom is that the left rebellion doesn't have a chance of success. And it might actually enhance the shift to the right. Because what happened in the campaign is that Bernie Sanders have spent a lot of time demonizing Hillary Clinton and attacking her and mobilizing the people who should be her natural supporters against her. So he actually decimated that camp and broke it into half, smaller half with him and the bigger half with that, and that helped the other side. Similarly, people are saying that Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party under him, is going to be unelectable, which means that the battle is going to be between the center-right and the far-right, and this will mean that the center-right, as we see now in Germany, have to move even further to the right in order to fight. Wouldn't it have been wiser, for example, for people on the left to ally themselves with people in the center rather than infight?
You know, Abdul Wahab, in many ways, this is actually what happened. First of all, I come here because I know I'm being. First of all, you could not have a gentler soul than Bernie Sanders when it came to her. Compare Bernie Sanders' criticism of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump's criticism. He is still a very gentle man, and he kept talking about issues and poverty and labor class and this and that. I mean, you cannot have any gentler sort of left liberal. He's not really that left in many aspects, but yes, he's a socialist. But then, ultimately, this is my point, the fact that he was chapter and verse cheated out of being elected as the representative of Democratic Party did not damage Hillary Clinton, because his supporters systematically voted for her in swing states. Now they keep talking about, she has almost 3 million more popular votes than Donald Trump, and only lost by Electoral College. Yes, that is true. But that discrepancy that now, again, Democrats and liberals want to use, our country is really pro-Hillary Clinton. No. The country is, these are Sanders supporters who judiciously voted for Hillary Clinton, lesser of two evil argument, in order not to give the space to Donald Trump. So effectively what you're saying actually happened, but still she lost. So, and also, both in the case of Jeremy Corbyn and in Sanders, I think they know for a fact that the best that they can do is actually have a catalytic effect on the position of liberals, not to actually win. It is impossible. For Jeremy Corbyn, for example, even in the context of the UK. They can have an impact, a discursive impact, a catalytic impact on the position of the liberal. And that is the only hope that can exist. Otherwise, alternatively, the left has to just shut up and stay out of the game and then, as you know, the more this, if it's just Trump and Clinton goes gradually over towards Trump. In fact, since 1980, since the election of Ronald Reagan, in the aftermath of the Iran hostage crisis, every year that for 8 years, Ronald Reagan came and gave the State of the Union address, the center of gravity of American politics went to the right. And then, when the democratic response to the State of the Union was delivered immediately after the State of the Union, the Democrats kept going to the right. So at the conclusion of 8 years, 1980 to 1988, of Reaganomics, that it has become the center of gravity of American neoliberal, there was no left. So you have to also see, if you put the three in the spectrum of each other, how, in fact, the democratic liberal have a tendency to go to the right. If there is no, for example, all poor Sanders could do was to argue for student loans to be forgiven or some facility for student loans. That's the only thing that he could do. He keeps saying that the Democratic platform was the most progressive in the history of Democratic Party. What's his name? Cornel West tried to get one word, occupation, into the platform of the Democratic Party. They threw him out. They will not accept one word, occupation for Palestine.
Last question.
So, two quick information. One is the Nobel Prize the New York columnist
Oh, Thomas Krugman, yeah.
Krugman.
Krugman, yeah.
Krugman wrote a piece in which Krugman is considered, as you know, to be on the left.
Yeah.
But he wrote a piece called Calling Obama a Transformative President, considering the context in which Obama operates. He said I was critical of him, but now I see that he is a transformative president. So I want to see your comment. And he listed, so this is the first one. That's your comment on the identity.
Yeah.
Where I like it when you said we should not quintessentialize,
Yes.
but make it strategic. This reminded me of the debate between David Axelrod and this guy called Jeffrey something on the CNN. He's on the with Trump,
Mm-hmm.
and Axelrod was actually making the same point that you are making. In other words, identity on the democratic side, politics is seen as like for example, affirmative action and all of that is seen as or women's rights. All these groups is to right the wrongs done by the hegemony.
Exactly.
So isn't what they are saying similar to what you are saying? In other words, nobody is arguing that identity politics has to be the ideal.
Yes.
You should always use,
Yes.
but it is used as what you would
Very
call
strategic.
strategic.
Yes. Yes.
So where
yeah.
did you find
Very
the mistake?
Your first point, Krugman's notion about Trump being transformative, Obama being transformative. There are two aspects to Trump, Obama. One is substantive, one is symbolic. Substantively, you can create a balance sheet. One column here, one column there. You say, for example, his signing of the Paris Accord for the environment as to his positive side. And then you realize in this recent investigative journalism that The Guardian did, that he actually did invest heavily, but in South Africa and India and Australia in fossil fuel. You can say that marriage equality, for example. You can say appointment to the Supreme Court. You can say many issues, Obamacare, the Affordable Act, medical thing. That these are all to the positive side. And then go to the other side. For example, his drone attacks, his civilian casualties of drone attacks, or kill list, or wishy-washy position on Syria. You know, you can add other things. These are substantive aspects of his 8 years of presidency that people can debate and have different assessment. Where I think Krugman is right